Today on episode number 405 of the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast, Alan Levine is back to talk about open education as a way of being.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Welcome to this episode of Teaching in Higher Ed. I'm Bonni Stachowiak, and this is the space where we explore the art and science of being more effective at facilitating learning. We also share ways to improve our productivity approaches so we can have more peace in our lives and be even more present for our students. Alan Levine is an independent educational technologist, sometimes calling himself an itinerant web geek, providing anything from development of custom websites, most often, but not limited to WordPress, but also supporting planning for training and development in working and creating online. He creates a lot of free resources like WordPress themes, plugins, and other funky web tools available on GitHub, and he has more than 60,000 of his own Flickr photos in the public domain. Alan, welcome back to Teaching in Higher Ed.
It's great to be here, Bonni.
I understand that you and I are taking this show on the road, although I don't love traveling. What I love kind of doing is sitting down on a couch. So instead of on a road, maybe we're on a couch today, perhaps? Are we sitting on a couch?
Sure, we can do that. We can sit a couch, a lounge chair, whatever's comfortable. But I had this thought after going to someone else's podcast of when you do this, like as a host, you're inviting someone into your place. And yeah, it's usually a Zoom room or it's just, but really you're the host. And I kind of imagine what would happen if we record it on your couch or your space. And I don't know, it probably doesn't make a difference. We're still having a conversation, but it's just one of Alan's weird back of the mind thoughts.
So I think one of the things you're reminding me of as we get into talk today about open education more broadly is really entering into other people's spaces. And as you were describing that, coming to join someone on the road or kind of take a little bit of perspective taking, it is just dawning on me right now that in some ways I did some of that work before the pandemic. So I can vividly remember when we switched from using Skype, which was audio only, our technical setup switched so we would do Zoom. And then I found it really intriguing that there would be some people who had a very strong preference for having that simulated eye contact and being able to see that. And then some who were like, no. And it was very drastic. I didn't do a complete analysis on it, but from memory, a lot of it was that men seemed to, and maybe it was just that happened to be the men I was speaking to, but really liked to have the eye contact, and then women tended to not, just in all generalities. And so I can remember being very surprised when we made the switch, and then someone, can we turn the video camera on? And I thought, oh gosh, I have no makeup on and just look terrible. And one person going, you look so different. I don't know what it is. And I'm going, it's because I look horrible today because I didn't know I was going to have my camera on. But really now just so much more of an ease with most of the time now the camera is on, and an ease with, I'm going to show up however I'm going to show up that day. But really there is that intimacy of entering another person's space. And for some people that was really not a welcome invitation. And but I enjoy it. I enjoy it most of the time. I enjoy it, and it's also painful, but in good ways, to be experiencing that, not just with another person, but also then trying to envision, which I try not to do too much, the people who are on the other end. So as we get started in this conversation, I'd like to invite you to just share a little bit on open education. Do you see that as a movement? And or do you see it as a way of being? Is it both? Is it neither? I'd love to hear you share a little bit about that.
I will. I kind of want to pick up because that dynamic that you described, to me, it's one of these pitfalls where we find you can't be assertive about either being right. because I have had really brilliant conversations through audio only, through the Skype or whatever means, where it was just the conversation that made it felt like we were all there. And so that can work. But there is something often in conversations where it is valuable because we don't have the body language in audio only. So there was something valuable about being able to see the person we're talking with. So I don't feel comfortable saying absolute whether either one is correct. And, that goes into talking about, open education as a whole thing. So, it's a movement, and, you could, trace the origins back to all the things that were done in distance and open learning that preceded the internet and that whole history, up to the major event of MIT with introducing their open courseware initiative, where they basically gave away the shop in terms of course materials, which, leads to some of the questions that already came on Twitter. It's like, course materials is not the course experience. But that was an impetus, and as of lately, the thing that's been the big energizer to no secret is the concept of open textbooks and, addressing student needs of affordability at the same time, giving faculty the customization to not just take what publishers shove at them. So yeah, it's a movement because I guess, it's a movement because, maybe not everybody's on board or not everybody understands it. And so for me, openness has always been like an attitude or way of being. That doesn't really answer anything for people who want to understand what open education is about. And, its broadest aim is, the simple thing of making it accessible to anyone, regardless, and not as a commodity, but also that it's more than materials, that it's, practices and ideas and exchange. But for a long time, it's felt like the focus has been on the things, the pile of things. And it used to be learning objects, and, then it was OERs and it's textbooks, and they're all important and they're all things that are key to the work that we do. But I've really always been more interested by just kind of the human dynamic of what it means to be in a potential space where we can have connection and community at the same time. The dark side of the yin yang circle that we constantly see that's there too. And so it's something to wrestle with. So again, like is it better to do podcasts where you see the person with cameras on or cameras off? It depends. Like I can't say 100% for sure. I don't feel comfortable espousing like absolutes in something that's so complex.
It reminds me a lot of the conversations around educational technology in general, and that is just what are the affordances? One of the things I notice now is that there's way less crosstalk, especially when there may be 3 co-authors on a book, and maybe they all come on, and they can we sort of learn our own social norms as we join, and there's just less crosstalk. Yet if we were only audio right now and couldn't see each other now, I think there's a part of me that, because I actually, in those cases, like to close my eyes because I like to picture that, again, podcasting is such an intimate medium, so you're actually with that person. People will tell me, oh yeah, I took you, Sarah Rose Kavanaugh just the other day said, I took you for a walk, you and Josh Eiler for a walk with the dog or whatever. Someone has a lake walk that they do with the podcast. They've got it, planned into their week and all that kind of thing. So to imagine with my eyes closed and not having to be performative at all to attempt to resolve anyone's nerves on the other end with whatever, I also had to be really careful actually early on doing what today I would call classroom observations, but this was a computer training company, so we didn't call it that, but sitting in people's classes, because the more that they were really getting me to think and challenging me in a really good way, the more my eyebrows would go down. So I had to train myself to eyebrows go up while you're taking notes, because it was actually more of a compliment if the eyebrows were down, because it was like, oh wow, you're making me think really hard. And anyway, so I think about those affordances and those kinds of ways that people might come across. So this actually takes us to, and by the way, the question that you had mentioned, about using open educational resources when, what would students feel like they're getting? And I think there's a lot we could say as far as creating those experiences. And I try to use the word being a curator a lot. So I think too many faculty think we have to make this stuff up for ourselves. So anyway, this gets us to Terry Green's question. He asked about what motivates you to share so openly. And he mentioned splots, which, again, for people who haven't been super familiar, a real way of creating sharing within a course through blogs that can come from lots of different sources, and photography and blogging. So what motivates you to do that? And he says, Terry Green says, and also, please ask him never to stop. So could you talk a little bit about what motivates you?
Terry Green does, because he's so nice and generous and such a consummate. And I've gotten to work with Terry a lot. I guess it's the things that happen that are often unexpected. And so you can't go to a thing like, oh, I'm going to start sharing stuff. So people contact me and they use my pictures on books, or you can't go with the expectation of happening. So the magic of serendipity is when you're not looking for it and someone responds. It's as simple as, it used to be the old, when blogging was the rage and teachers were starting to do it and students would be blogging about, an author they were reading. Then the author would join the conversation. I mean, that would change the experience for an incredible number of people, just to have that glancing, unexpected blow. So I kind of live for those moments. I don't know. It always, since I started this work, it just seemed the way to go. It just seemed like that is what I can do. And what I most want to do is do it in a way, I don't want to sound like, oh, I'm promoting my stuff or my stuff is great. And it's not about me, but a lot of it is sharing the way. I always thought I was influenced by John Udell, brilliant computer scientist, who had this concept of what happens if people narrate their work, meaning, and we might have even talked about this in our first episode, see how blurry my memory is, that often, in many fields, but also in education, we're pushed towards, publishing the final paper or getting the presentation or the video or the thesis. And so what happens to that whole journey of things that you learned, the wrong turns, things that got left on the cutting room floor that you did to get to that point? And so we often don't capture that. And, not that I want to turn into a life recorder, but, to me, it always helped when people I respected or just followed or learned from would sort of share how they went about challenging problems, whether they're technical, whether they're pedagogical. So they sort of share how their mind works in a little bit. And that always appealed to me. But mostly what I found, Bonnie, is that there's some mix of kind of participating in other people's spaces, and it can be as simple as, joining a Twitter thread or, commenting on a blog or giving someone feedback. Those are really positive ways in the open field to participate and contribute that don't involve publishing or picking licenses or all that stuff, but just a small level of giving back to someone else, because I think it creates some virtuous cycles. And what I found, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is, it's so easy to say, oh, Twitter's terrible today. It's horrible. It's a dumpster fire. And it is in places, but in many other places, you find such warmth and generosity. And so it's a complex environment. And there's something about that and other social spaces, to some degree, I don't even need to name them, that, somehow I read someone who reads Bonnie, and then I see their conversation. She looks interesting. And then all of a sudden I start following you. And then I'm kind of tapped into the people that you have conversations or share with. And to me, that just seems to be like increasing the potential serendipity power of what can happen to you. And I just think doing that in a way that doesn't become a full-time job, but it comes back in beneficial ways, but it takes time. And to me, that's just what my experience has been, but I can't really say it works for anybody else. So to Terry's end, sharing pictures. Well, I liked photography, and I just started something inspired by a colleague of just trying to take photos every day, not to, notch a board on the wall, because many years I'm like 340 out of 365, but devoting time, effort to say, like, I'm going to step away from my work for 15 minutes. I'm going to go outside and look for something interesting. Or I'm going to, I'm looking around my room and just like, is there some detail? I've been in this room, how many thousands of times, but the way the light's falling on the floor or the way those books are arranged, you can always see something new in a familiar space. And to me, it's been a useful, creative, driver for me. But I can't say that works for other people. And so, but it's just become a habit and a thing that sustains me. And I know when I'm in ruts with my work or my project, when I come up with something, I think I can just, my wife always calls it disappearing down the rabbit holes and finding one thing that leads to another. I kind of pay attention, especially online, to things that just raise my curiosity. And so, like, random pictures from the Library of Congress in my new browser tabs. I love those. It's this Chrome extension, and it just makes me stop and think, like, what is going on in that picture? And so I like the creative juices that come from that.
I want to have you help me through something I've been thinking about. So by the time this airs, I'm fairly sure this episode will already be out. So I will have already done this. But as of today, our recording, I have not. I spoke with Rami Kalir yesterday and his project Annotate 22. And what we spoke about in that episode is that one of our children annotated the only faucet in our entire house that has a separate faucet for hot than it does cold. And unbeknownst to me, they had gone upstairs, printed it out from my fancy label printer. I didn't even, because they can access that. And it's not like someone has to be sitting there to log them in or anything. It's just a label printer. And so I've been wanting to take a picture of that, but candidly right now our recycling bin is overflowing in that particular room, so I'm waiting until that gets taken care of and everything. But I keep thinking, like, I want it to be special. I don't know how to approach this. So if you have something that seems rather ordinary like that, although it's special because it's annotated and everything, but it's a faucet, it's a bathtub faucet, how might you go about approaching that from a photographer's eye, wanting to be able to see it differently? What would be some ideas you would give someone of wanting to capture this in some unique kind of way?
Well, that's a good question, and it put me on the spot, because I think, and to some degree, photography is the act of, cropping out from the world in detail. And so it's how the framing is always important. So, it's, do you fill the image as much as possible with this faucet to emphasize what's different? Or do you put it way down in the corner to show where it fits into its larger surroundings? Do you think of some curious object like a Lego figure that you can sit on top, like he's trying to do construction on it? Sometimes it's changing the light in that room. Of course, in that kind of room, you may not have the option, but things can change whether you do it in bright daylight, or you could go in at night and illuminate it with a flashlight and make it kind of spooky. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you're just looking at something and you're saying, there's nothing there. So you might take it for fun and it might work out. You might be able to edit it. I do edit my photos. Other times I know I've been outside usually, and it's just something about the light, and something says to me, there's a picture here. And I don't know what it is, but maybe I need to get down on the ground and change perspective. Maybe I need to shift so it's more backlit than frontlit. But I guess the rules of photography are like, really pay attention to light, because that's everything. And so maybe there's good reflections off of the faucet, like sparkles or things like that. And maybe it's something that is kind of flat but may look more interesting if you did it black and white or made it look like an antique photo. I don't know if that gets anywhere, but I will look forward to seeing what you produce with that photo. I just can't but remember, I used to, when I was long ago, when I used to travel, I was always amazed at different hotels, especially in various parts of the world, where you'd go into a hotel shower and there'd be a different kind of interface that you've never seen before. And some of them had elaborate instructions. Like I saw one with a 7-page, like a 7-point list of how to operate the shower. And so I started collecting somewhere on Flickr. I've got a tag set of showers as interface items. Because, if you get the hot water wrong, you're going to burn yourself. And that's not a good thing. But it's just funny that a thing as simple as a faucet has so many ways to be designed that someone thinks is ideal. And generally for the user ends up being like, oh, I don't know how to use this thing.
Yeah, there's two things that are coming out of what you just shared. And thank you for that. One is that you do it a lot. I mean, you try a lot of different things. You try it with bright light. You try it with not the light. So that's when I have been successful at creating what I consider to be really beautiful images. It's because I took 400 that weren't. So it's nice that digital space is not too troublesome these days. And of course, you can always just delete the ones you don't care for if you're concerned about the storage space and all of that. But so try it different ways. Try. But then the other thing that's coming out is that, of course, there's not just one way to do it. And that's the trouble that we get in sometimes is thinking, oh, Alan would know the right way to do this. He's a good photographer. I'm not. And that self-talk is what gets us into trouble. And candidly, I just want to mention real quick, I took a photography class when I was in college. And I'm remembering today speaking to you that I spent all this time and got really excited about taking one of the assignments was a portrait assignment. So I got this beautiful student who I knew, and she would stand outside of these statues. And I got what I considered to just be beautiful pictures of a woman I thought was beautiful, who I did not know well, but I was really proud of that work. And I got a C on the assignment. And I remember vividly the professor writing, well, there was just nothing different about these photographs. And I thought, well, it's different. This is a beautiful woman and it's a beautiful campus. And these are beautiful statues. I don't even know what you mean. It wasn't different enough. like how it was really both something I took very personally. And I think if we're spending so much time to try to make something different, I think that's maybe not my goal as a photographer. And here was a professor assuming that I wanted something, I wanted to capture what I saw. I didn't want to capture something that would be so different. You know what I mean? And anyway, so much there as far as teaching and all of that. I did also want to say one other thing, and that is that I challenged myself because I feel I can just get in this mode. And one thing that I got into was feeling like I wasn't good enough or smart enough to do Mike Caulfield's SIFT. And I had him on the show and I followed all his stuff and I did all of that. And then when coronavirus hit and I had students, they would bring in on sticky notes, this week in business ethics news, and they would stick it on the back wall. And I remember when one sticky note was about this thing called coronavirus or COVID or whatever. And then before you know it, 2 weeks later, there were practically all that. And then before you know it, we weren't, of course, in that classroom anymore, but a lot of misinformation coming that way. So I told myself, you cannot do this anymore. And I forced myself to create a playlist on my YouTube channel that's for my ongoing SIFT. And I mean, of course, how could I expect myself to know as much as a man who does this for a living? This is his life's work. I mean, why would I hold myself to that standard? So I'm just trying, but it's every time I post a video, I laugh because there's like 20 views. It's not like it's out there. But I think one of the fears that we can have, though, is some part of us being really wrong or stupid is going to be out there on the internet for everyone to see forever. So I don't know if you have that, Alan. Do you have things where you look back and you go, well, I certainly don't think that today, or I was wrong, or do you perceive older you from years ago as not knowing what you're talking about, but you still leave it up there anywhere for preservation?
All the time. But I have to let you know that on my clock here, we recently passed 2:08 p.m. and we'll get back to 2:08. But I just will let you know I was noticing.
I love it. Speaking of noticing things.
There is, we chatted about this before, and I'm trying to think of the way to articulate it. This thing where we're kind of always measuring ourselves to someone else, the experts in the field or the people who know more, and downplaying, what we do. And you can't get around it. And there is a name for it. I'm not going to throw it out, but we all know what it is, and we all have it, and we all deal with it. And what I found is I don't care if there's something, because that's not me 10 years ago. So if I have something, and I will find things I've written before that I've been wrong, that I disagree with now, but that's okay, because I'm not a clone of that person. I mean, I'm different, and that was part of where I am now. And I don't mind being wrong. And, I found in my teaching that it's quite beneficial to mess up in front of my students, like, to do something wrong, to run the technology wrong, to have something break, because I show them the problem isn't failing. The problem is, like, not trying to remedy or work our way around it. So we kind of have this self built in idea of perfection that we can be. And so I kind of tried to be kind of a goofball where appropriate. And so not to take myself so seriously that I think I have to be this perfect person. My blog posts are riddled with typos. When I go back and see old ones, it's like, I don't have time to fix them all, or, there's broken links, but I don't think I have to be this perfect entity. And I think, again, but you have to come to this on your own. You have to find and develop, your personality. And, when you look around you and see your colleagues, and you're like in awe of, I'm in awe of Mike Caulfield. Like, I can't phrase things like him, but I shouldn't try to. And so you have to get to some point, hopefully, where you kind of cultivate and develop your own confidence and your own approach to things. And I found long ago with certain things, and this kind of may feed into one of the questions that came from Joe Murphy, that I think the bigger problem that we face, both with the students we teach and with doing faculty development, is like finding that right way to help people understand that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say, like, I'm an idiot. I don't know. You don't say I'm an idiot, but I don't know how to do this. I broke this, or I messed up. Can I get help? I think people feel like they have to figure stuff out. And, this came when I was doing my media classes, and my students would blog their progress, and I would read things in their blog that would be like, I was trying to do this one technique in GIMP, and I spent, an hour and a half trying to figure out how to do an alpha mask. And that's where I came up with the rule that Joe described as, not that it was a rule because I couldn't enforce it, but I would suggest, like, if you spent 15 minutes trying to find a solution to something, especially technical, you search for it everywhere, you've watched a video. If you get to the 15-minute mark and you've gotten nowhere, ask either me or your student colleagues, because we were a small community of a class. Like, it's okay to ask for help. I think that's such a barrier for a lot of people. Even me, like, we had this thing that says, oh, if I do this, I'm going to look stupid. They're all going to think I'm stupid, or that is a big narrative in the back of my mind. And, I've done some talks where I would ask people to, write what their obstacles to sharing are. And generally it's that thing of, my work isn't as good. I don't do anything special. And that's a hard one to sort of get around. And you just have to, encourage, embrace. And to me, like, I like to model, like, being imperfect, because I am extremely imperfect.
Well, this is a perfect transition for me to head us over to the recommendation segment. I have two I'd like to recommend today, 2 links for people to check out with 2 overriding principles. One is to remember it's not linear. And the post I'd like to share is from Clint Smith, his Instagram post. And for those not familiar with him, has a Harvard PhD and has a New York Times best-selling book called How the Word is Passed. And he wrote this on his Instagram post when he appeared in Harvard's monthly alumni magazine, I believe it is. He writes, "The first time I applied to Harvard, I didn't get in. I was bummed. But I put my head down, applied the next year, and was accepted. Then, in the third year of my PhD program, I failed my comprehensive exams and had to take them a second time, with the understanding that if I failed them again, I would be kicked out of the program. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I felt like a fraud and a failure. I felt like I was on the verge of disappointing everyone around me. It was a real low point. I eventually took the exams again and passed the second time, but I'm writing this because I think it can be easy for people to create a clean, neat, linear narratives about your life and how one thing just naturally led to another and how it was always all peaches and roses. That's rarely the case, and it definitely wasn't the case for me. After getting this out of the mailbox, and the picture, by the way, is his face on the cover of their magazine. After getting this out of the mailbox, I realized that this is probably why seeing my graduate school magazine with my face on it, the graduate school I was one exam away from being kicked out of, is really surreal. Could have never imagined something like this after getting that email that made my heart sink 5 years ago. I'm grateful for those who held me down in those hard moments and who reminded me that no matter what happened, my value as a person was not contingent on being affiliated with any school, any program, or any degree. Thanks to Ed Magazine for the generous feature and interview, Wild Times. The second little lesson and then anecdote or artifact I'd like to pass on is to take the time for feedback. And this is another social media post, although this time on Twitter. And this is from Corey Stoughton. And she writes, basement flood. Opening boxes haven't peaked in 4 years. The forgotten highlight of my entire existence. And I didn't realize the Harvard connection until this very moment. This is Harvard Law School letterhead. And it is from a name that might be familiar to some people, and that's Elena Kagan, who is on our Supreme Court, a Supreme Court justice in the United States. And her title at the time, Visiting Professor of Law. This is June 22nd, 2001. And she writes, Dear Ms. Stoughton, just a quick note to thank you for an excellent exam. You hit all the questions just right. It was a pleasure to read. Thanks, too, for your excellent class participation. Congratulations, and I hope you're having a wonderful summer. And this reminds me a little bit, Alan, of earlier when I told that story of the theater professor telling me that my portraits weren't, these are things we carry in our minds and our hearts, and that they either can affirm our value as human beings, or they can detract from our sense of value and contribution. And so I'm just going to say we got to take that time for feedback. And just imagine we could wind up in somebody's either literal or digital file cabinet someday and let them rediscover the ways that we're edifying their lives and their work.
That's beautiful. And it takes some experience to get to that point of saying whether your photo instructor had that opinion, it's like that photo mattered to me and there was something there that is important. And I know I couldn't do that as a student. Like I can only do it as a much older student right now. Thanks for sharing those. I scribbled down some things. I like, looked at links I've been saving in my Pinboard. I still do social bookmarking. The first one is this site called, I never heard of this, Youglish.com. And this is one of those things where like I find out I don't know stuff every day. And there was a discussion on one of our listservs where faculty members asking about websites that provide pronunciation guides for terms for teaching art. And that there are some pronunciation websites, like how do you pronounce blah, but they're full of ads and it's a little bit distracting. And so, I thought about it and sort of my answer was like, well, there's some of the online dictionaries that have the audio versions. And I thought of Wiktionary, the Wiki Dictionary, which has some audio ones. And, I actually didn't get around to responding it. But there was another response from someone else on the list who mentioned this site. And what it does is it archives selected videos from YouTube that have that word, and they must be searching or using the API to get them in the transcript. And you can find art terms. So, I found chiaroscuro, which I remembered from art class. And, it has like 180 different videos where it has that in context. The beautiful thing about that is it's helpful for understanding the pronunciation of the word, but you get it within the context of another discussion. And it's available in like 12 or 15 languages. So for people, like if I ever, travel to France or something and I want to understand some French words, I can sort of get them from there. And so whether the resource is any good or not, it's that continual reminder is that, like, I don't know almost anything about anything on the internet. There's always something else out there. The other project I kind of stumbled upon, and again, like, I come across these things, I look at them, I poke around a while, and I kind of register them away in the back of my mind. But the Open Syllabus Project has been mining this huge archive of syllabi from classes, and they're ones that are publicly available from institutional websites. But what they're doing is they aren't making the syllabi public because they do belong to people, but they've sort of analyze them and pulled out metadata from them to get things about, like, what are the most popular readings assigned in a particular class or at a particular college, or which of these how many are using open textbooks. And so it's an interesting way to use data in a way that sort of respects the privacy of the people who created these. Unlike, the homework sites, which just scavenge student work and publish it without their consent. And so there is a way. I mean, they have a call for people to share their syllabi if they want to contribute. But I just thought it was an interesting project and a clever way of using a large data set to provide insight. So there's things that, come along that I just, the eyebrow goes up and the hamburger menu, gets clicked on. And, if anything, that kind of curiosity is something that, I hope, I'll know I'm losing it if I kind of just shrug it off, because that's been the magic juice for me.
It has been such a pleasure to get to have continued conversation with you in lots of different ways. And I'm so glad we got to go on the road today and sit on a couch and get to connect in this way and be able to share this between both of the podcasts feels really special to me. So thank you so much. I'd like to thank Alan Levine for once again being a guest on today's episode of Teaching in Higher Ed. And I'd like to encourage you, if you've not already, to subscribe to the weekly Teaching in Higher Ed update, where you can receive the show notes from today's episode, which there are lots of great links in this one, as well as the recommendations that show up on the episode, but also a collection of recommendations that are growing over time that don't show up on the show, a little bit beyond what we cover here, as well as some quotable words and other resources. So head on over to teachinginhighered.com/subscribe. And thanks once again for being a part of Teaching in Higher Ed. I'll see you next time.